What an amazing film. I'll begin at the beginning, which for me is, they died in 1991. So how did you come to make this film now? Like, what made this timely? How did you discover them, and when?
So we had first met Katia and Maurice actually when Shane and I were finishing up the last film that we made together, which actually was part of the Film Independent Edit Lab, so could not have been done without Film Independent. That film's called The Seer and the Unseen, and it tells the story of an Icelandic woman who's in communication with spirits of nature. We wanted to open the film with archival imagery of erupting volcanoes in Iceland. Specifically archival because we wanted it to feel kind of out of time and kind of magical in terms of tonally how we wanted to establish the film. There's many other steps too if you want to add anything, but that's kind of how we first met them.
No, just we were in the process of making another film that we were going to shoot in Siberia, and we were doing that in early 2020. And when we weren't able to do that, we decided to pivot to make Fire of Love. And one of the interesting things was in a moment when we were so constrained and so unable to see the world and to travel and make films in the way we were accustomed to making them, it was a real salve for us during the pandemic.
That's beautiful. So where is the archive of all of their incredible footage? And was it easy to get access to?
When we started the project, it was in an archival house called Image Est in Nancy, France. Maurice's brother, Jocelyn Chaput, had actually, through the years, it was difficult for him to manage his archive that he inherited, and so he entrusted it to various archival houses, and by the time we came to it, it was at Image Est in Nancy, France. It actually wasn't that hard to get it. It took a few phone calls that were led by our other producer, Ina Fitchman. Image Est was wonderful to work with. Bertrand Krafft, Maurice's brother, liked our approach, and so he gave his approval and consent for us to work with Image Est to receive the footage. But there was another batch, that was about 200 hours, I should say, of 16mm footage that Katia and Maurice took, along with thousands of still photographs. There was then another kind of batch of footage that we worked with outside of that archive, of television programs, of documentaries that were made of Katia and Maurice. They were mostly on kind of French TV, Belgian TV. There were some radio broadcasts as well. Those were really fun for us to work with because that's really the only time Katia and Maurice were together and speaking, because they were rarely together in their own footage. I should also say their own footage came to us without any sound, so that created tremendous complexity in the edit room.
Was there also, did they, all that radio and TV stuff, was that stuff they compiled in their lives, or did his brother do it, or how did it all come to be in one place?
So that actually was collected through our archival researcher, Nancy Marcotte, who is an amazing hero of our project. She poured through all kinds of archives throughout Europe and also in the US to collect them. We had the great fortune also of interviewing some of Katia and Maurice's loved ones and collaborators, and so they had some personal archives. There's one cinematographer, Olivier Doat, for example, who shot with Maurice and Katia for many years, and after they died, he made his own documentary about Katia and Maurice, and he gave us a VHS copy that we then, transferred to get to work with that as well. So that Nancy really led that process of archival research, and she's definitely one of the heroes on our team.
There were a couple of scenes where it looked like they were shooting on video. Did you also was there kind of a progression of film technology in their archive of different formats?
It seems like they mostly shot on 16mm, but Joss, do you want to talk about coming across footage during the edit?
Sure, yeah. The progression you mentioned, definitely we noticed that as we looked through the footage that they shot over the years. It was, I think, all 16mm. Sometimes the video you might see in the film is from programs that were made about them. So if there are a few shots every now and then where they're out on the field and it's a TV crew doing a special about Boris and Katia Krafft. And at times those shots were indispensable in terms of, there's a shot of the two of them together, so we would integrate them. But over the years it seemed like they were evolving their own style always, and there are differences I noticed in if you track it more or less. I mean, it was never 100% we didn't have 100% clarity on the chronology of what we were looking at. We had to puzzle it together, but there were many reels of footage that didn't have a year attached. There, actually, very few had a year attached, and we had to infer by reading their books and
Wow.
talking to all the interviews Sarah conducted. Yeah, it seemed like the filming increasingly the camera would I think the camera lingered longer as they got older. Maybe at first it seemed like the shooting style was like there were more snap zooms. It was almost like more directly influenced by the French New Wave, and over the years maybe it was more influenced by Terminator or I don't know, but I was always wondering, what kind of what films were they referencing? Because I think they were cinephiles. It just seemed like they, but there's, I don't know, we talked about that a lot. I feel like I'm forgetting something about how their style progressed. Sarah, we talked about this before. There was something else.
Yeah, I think you captured it really well, but they did seem to possess more of a confidence, not just with their cinematography and their photography, but also their relationship with volcanoes. That progressed, of course, is something we document in the film. But we always wondered if they had the sense, too, that they could die at any moment, and so they were trying to enshrine themselves in their own myth, in a way. Because they do show up a little bit more as the years go on. Katia, for example, will be used for scale against these, enormous volcanic landscapes. But that was something we wondered if they knew that they were setting their image, their story to posterity because they could die at any moment. So I'll just say a lot of questions abounded as we went through the process, but it was such a delight to get to see the progression of their imagery through the years.
It's really interesting to hear you all talk about the evolution of their style as filmmakers. And I was thinking about watching it, that you were getting to know them as subjects and sort of the thematics of the film, but also getting to know them as fellow filmmakers. And I'm just curious if for you, did you feel like you were meeting a kindred spirit, or was it somebody with a filmmaking style totally unlike your own, or you were more sort of observing it, or
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that question. I hope you all chime in, but I think we just loved them so much. I think I would dream to be a kindred spirit with them. I think one of the things that I was so moved by was how their imagery captured what felt like the sentience of nature, just the utter power, aliveness, and interconnectivity of the earth, of lava, volcanic gas, the bubbling mud, all of it. There are such relationships everywhere in the earth, such a sense of a life force. For me in my work, that's something I'm really drawn to, is how humans make meaning with and out of non-human nature. And I just found that everywhere, and the way that they wrote about volcanoes, the way they shot volcanoes. So that was extremely exciting to get to work with. What did you chime in too?
No, I think we all had a sense of kinship with them as filmmakers, but also as livers of life.
Yeah.
That here were these people that were trying fervently to figure out how to live a meaningful life and die a meaningful death, how to get closer to a sense of understanding, even if you can never fully understand. And I think for that, because of that, they were inspiring artists, inspiring scientists, inspiring humans, and to get to spend the time that we did with them is a real gift.
Yeah, beautiful. One of the things I love about this film is what's not in it. And, you don't cut away to contemporary talking heads or a lot of conventions of more boring documentary film. And it's so alive. It feels, just cinematically unbelievably rich and exciting and incredibly pleasurable to watch too. There's just their footage of the volcanoes and of nature, as you were talking about, is like I could have watched another, hour of that. But I'm curious if you could talk about how you made decisions. Your previous work also you don't seem to rely on the talking head interview, but how did you decide to structure this way, where it's almost entirely their footage, and then with the news footage intercut?
We were fascinated by the idea of kind of an archival project that almost, or that had a kinship with geology or geologic methodologies in a way, of taking kind of the clues that are left behind from these people's lives, and surveying them, putting them in relationship with the images, in relationship with each other, but also acknowledging the gaps. The archive was spectacular, but also so limited. As I mentioned before, the 16mm footage didn't have sound to it. The news footage, the television broadcasts that they were on, were often edited and very strange ways, to say the least. So we were really limited with what we could do with it. But those gaps, those limitations kind of bred or just opened up new creative possibilities. But I think one of the most fascinating ones for us was just embracing the unknowns, all that we could never know because it wasn't captured in the visual record, and because they had passed away and we could never verify the information, no matter how much research we did with the people that they knew and we interviewed, or from their many books. So it was really embracing kind of a language of the unknown that we mentioned through our narration, and we kind of hint at with the scientific process of going towards, the vast mysteries of our planet, only to realize you can't understand this seemingly supernatural force, and same thing too with the mysteries of love. But I think that actually, so the unknown was a huge part that structured kind of our approach, but really it always came back to a love story for us. There was a sentence that we read in a book that Maurice authored where he says, "For me, Katia and volcanoes, it is a love story." And with that, we thought, oh, this is our thesis. It's a love triangle. It's about these two humans in love with this massive, vast, unknowable force. And that really was kind of the key guide and helped us to kind of structure the narrative arc of the film.
And I think we sort of believed in their project of love and science. And I think for us, we recognize that those things are best communicated through story, and story can oftentimes best be communicated through myth, and that they were involved in their own myth creation. And for us too, we wanted to create something that was reflective of the facts of their life, but was also bigger than their life, and could approach some sort of truth. And I think that required a very different treatment than a talking head, than a talking head movie.
That juxtaposition of the theme of the inherent unknowability of nature or of other people, combined with that, there's a sense of humor that comes through in the film. I mean, I suspect it's your sense of humor, but also theirs, and warmth and love. There's the line, is it curiosity is stronger than fear, and that sort of sentiment where it couples the unknowability and the sort of implacability of nature and the destructiveness of it with this, just like we're going about our business. Yeah, it's probably going to kill us, but we're going to keep doing this. And I mean, it's a really striking juxtaposition that is beautiful. I made a comment, not a question, sorry.
I love that. That's something we actually talked a lot about in the edit room. Just first, thank you for that lovely comment. We often, well, first I should say, Katia and Maurice were hilarious. They were so playful, and they were so close with one another. That was something we wanted to really embrace, and we worked so collaboratively on this film. Like, Aaron lives in New York, but basically moved in with me. I live in the Bay Area. Jocelyn lives just up the hill from me. She was at my house all hours. Shane lives here in LA, but was also at my house all the time. So we really had this group mentality where we were working long hours into the night. And we just laughed so much. So Katia and Maurice inspired a process in us of joy. And it was such an honor to get to play with and interpret their footage. So I hope that kind of the fun that we had can be felt in the film. But I also think that there's something about understanding the absurdity of life in a way that they knew so palpably. They thought human interaction and activity was often absurd. And so that's part of what drove them towards volcanoes, because they saw something that was, in their own words, beyond human understanding. But we thought that often freed them up from human frivolity to where they could just laugh at themselves. Yeah, and I feel like those were conversations we often had.
Well, definitely, just as they were students of the French New Wave, they were also students of existentialism, and they were reading, Sartre and Camus and Ionesco, and inside of that is just the most, as Sarah was saying, there's an absurdity to those works and to existential philosophy and also to life when when you're immersed in that. And if you really embody the spirit of it, you're going to be playful. You're going to see meaning and intentionality and like fundamental truths, but you're also going to see absurdity.
So I love the image of the four of you working on this film laughing at your house, but I would love to hear you talk more about the writing of this, because, the whole, how did you write this? I'm talking about specifically the written words that Miranda delivers. It's so beautifully written. It feels like incredible fiction, the voice, right? It's not a conventional narration of facts or anything. But could you talk about finding that voice, and also just how four people construct that together? I can't imagine.
Sure, yeah, I'll kick it off, but please, Jocelyn and Shane weigh in. We, at the very beginning, we did not want a narrator. I really hoped that it would just kind of be their footage, but due to all the limitations and due to the fact that we really wanted this to be a love story, again, because that seemed to be what was the most true to them, even though you can, of course, interpret their footage in many ways. If we were to do a character-driven love story, we needed another narrative device in order to bring that information in. And so we decided, also inspired by the French New Wave, that employs really interesting modes of narration to go about writing narration of our own. However, we didn't want it at all to feel like a voice of God narrator. We wanted a voice that was curious and perhaps as inquisitive as Katia and Maurice. And so that kind of set forth the beginnings of a style. I'll leave it there and let my collaborators take over. Who wants to jump in?
I think a lot of it was led by Sarah, where there would be ideas we would be watching the footage and have ideas about different sections that we knew we wanted to integrate into the film, but not sure how they would tie together. And Sarah, Jocelyn, and Aaron were on a Slack channel that would just ding constantly every hour of the night, every day of the week, with ideas and just like meditating for hours on if it should be, the or a in a certain sentence and going through it. And but having a real sense of the four of us there was no sense of ego in any of it. It was just we would find what the film wanted to say, and when you hear what the film wants to say, like, oh yeah, that's it. And it's just a process of not really even writing, it's sort of uncovering what wants to be said. And I think there was Jocelyn is quiet tonight, but she was our first narrator actually, and did an amazing job. That laid the foundation for Miranda to come in, and even when we were recording with Miranda, we were tweaking lines and words to the very end, and Miranda would oftentimes look to Jocelyn to be like, "Am I saying that correctly? Is that the intention of the writing in that moment?" And it was I think it's hard, coming with a cohesive voice with four people, but it seemed relatively smooth in this case.
I'll just add that I think the narrator's voice, we got to know her over time and developed rules over time around what she would and wouldn't say. At first, there was more exposition, and that was simply a result of narrative scaffolding that we needed at first to put the story together, and then over time we were able to lose lines as other elements of the film came together and as the structure crystallized. And that's one of my favorite parts of the process, is when you can start losing narration, especially, or text. I guess we didn't have text on screen really, so narration. But I do remember specifically just having very long Slack threads or conversations around how the narrator would know this, and would she know this, or maybe over time I think if you could do a time lapse of the text of the narration, you would over time see more question marks in the entirety of the text. At first it was a little more declarative, but then we found our footing and embraced this inquisitive character And that really, yeah. We never pictured who the narrator is, or, oh, that was one rule that we developed, is that the narrator never said I or referred to the sort of embodied human behind the voice. There was never any reference to, yeah, we didn't want to call attention to the world of the narrator, but that was not clear at first. It was rules that we developed over time, among others, yeah.
So related to that, I also wanted to ask about the music in the film, which I thought was fantastic, both the score and those kind of songs that you use. I mean, the French the kind of torch song fairly early on, the Maintenant, or I don't know the name of the song, but it's like an incredible moment in the film. It's just the music works so well there. Can you talk about sort of the process of putting music into this and how that related to the narration and just building that?
Sure. Well, we very much see this as a collage film and really trying to embrace all these discrete elements to kind of build this whole, and music was one of those textures that we were so excited to play with. Again, there's no imagery of Katia and Maurice kissing or holding hands, going on dates, that conventional imagery of a love story. And so we really saw music as a way to bring in emotion and kind of speak to the whimsy and the power of falling in love. We always kind of dreamed of what we called a retro-futuristic score, or another way of putting it is like dreaming of the future, but from a perspective of the past. We thought that just fit them, especially some of their fun kind of sci-fi B-movie aesthetics that they themselves embraced. It would just seem fitting. And so we started brainstorming, musicians who we liked, who could fit that or do that well. And Air came to mind, the French pop band. And Nicolas Godin, our composer, is one half of Air, of the duo Air. He was wonderful to work with. But we also had a lot of fun kind of playing with music in the edit, especially to bring some scenes together, again, that didn't have sound. So I'll kind of pass the baton over to you, Joss, if you want to talk about your use of music in the edit.
Yeah, I think probably my favorite part of the edit would be the musical dimension. I think it just made sense right off the bat for me. Maurice and Katia, to me, are very musical humans, and so are volcanoes. And it just kept, I had a hard time not having music, and if anything, I had to dial it back, and not put music everywhere. But there was just, especially where the footage, the archive is silent, it was another way to kind of explore the sonic world of the archive in a more subjective way, rather than do the sound design of the volcano. What if we embrace the musicality of it? And also with the love story component, it is a way to express the love. Like Sarah said, there's no shots of them holding hands or kissing or anything, but being able to throw in a few very romantic music cues is another way to just tell that love story. So I had a great time with the music. Yeah.
It also just brings us back to the writing conversation too, because as Sarah was saying, we thought of this as a collage film, and when you add music, the music communicates something in that moment, and for all the filmmakers too. The music says something that you were previously saying with narration, and then you see the music and you realize that you don't have to say that with the narration anymore because the music is telling that part of the story. So there's also this really beautiful conversation that happens between music, sound, picture, word, text, and it's interesting because the music generally, and for us, Nico's music came in later, and then that made us have to readjust, oftentimes what we were going to say or what we're going to see on screen, and then go back to the music and say the music actually has to account for this because we know we have to say this and the music can't say it. So it's a beautiful conversation that happens.
Shane, I wanted to ask you a question as producer. What were the biggest challenges with as a producer, what were the biggest challenges in producing this type of film? Where it's archival, there's not a lot of locations or, physical production going on. But what were the challenges for you as a producer?
I mean, I think the the team, made it relatively easy, and Jocelyn and Sarah are incredible to work with, and I know we had a lot of, and we had so many. Lucy, our animator, I think the hardest part usually in making a film is wrangling the team and making sure that everyone works well together and is doing what they need to do. And in this project, that was largely on track, but with problems, with the general challenges that happen in any production.
Right.
But I think more than anything, in this film is slightly different in the sense that we knew we had, when we saw their footage and when we heard their story, we knew that this was something truly special, truly profound. And I think the hardest thing when you look at that is doing honor to Maurice and Katia, and doing honor to the possibility of a film that can really, really touch people's heart and expand people's mind. And when you have something and you see it has a chance, I think that's the hardest thing, to make sure that you live up to the possibility of the subjects and of the footage.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more question. I'm being given the gesture. But my last question is, so this film has come out in the world, hopefully on the other side of the pandemic, where audiences are able to see this in theaters. This has not been a virtual release, and it had such an impact on audiences. And I'm curious what your experience of that has been. Have you watched it with audiences? Have you been able to see how it's affecting people? I'm curious your reaction to how the film is impacting audiences and what you're hearing back.
Well, it's been a tremendous honor to have the film out in the world. National Geographic Films and Neon have been our theatrical partners in putting the film out into the world and working with them. It's really been a dream. On one note, just kind of referencing what Shane just said, the fact that Katia and Maurice, 30 years ago, they were touring the world, showing these images to people in their presentations and conferences that they gave. The fact that their images are touring the world again just means so much. And on that note, I have trouble watching the film because I still think what if we took out that word or changed that shot? But the first time I watched it, since we had kind of a friends and family screening during the Sundance premiere, which technically went virtual this year, but we gathered with some friends to watch it. The second time I actually watched it was in France for the French premiere, where Maurice's brother Bertrand gave the introduction, and that was so meaningful. I get choked up thinking about it. And it was actually at the Louvre, which was really exciting for us, for these scientists to have their work be celebrated as art. So that was incredible to see it with the French audience, many of their loved ones. People had consulted on the film, and people we didn't even know, but they had touched, Katia and Maurice had touched their lives, came up to us afterwards, and so that was just particularly profound. But it's been really wonderful to hear how people connect to the film since then.
I would just add one thing. One of our executive producers, Jessica, was just on Mount Etna on a trip, and she reported back that she was wearing a Fire of Love button on her bag, and someone came up to her and said, "We just saw Fire of Love." This is in Italy. "We just saw Fire of Love in the theaters, and we decided to come to Mount Etna because of this film." And it was this couple who had done it together, and so for us, that's extraordinary.
That's great.
That the movie inspired two lovers to be in love with each other and go be in nature and experience a volcano, the creator of the world. And this is unmasking us as romantics, but for us, that was a dream come true that the movie could participate in changing these people's lives and changing and affecting the world in that way.
Yeah, I'll put that. I echo Sarah and Shane, and I'll just add that it's also just a delight with live audiences to see people jump back in their seats when there's an explosion or laugh when something we were editing in such a bubble, and sometimes I think, like any editing process, can get very insular. It just becomes like that, and we had a few test screenings throughout the process, but a big difference from a small test screening to large audiences, and so there's been also, just from the editing standpoint, just reassurance and relief at people laughing at the things that we were hoping they would laugh at, and that's just delightful to have that shared experience of something that we loved putting together. We joked a little bit that it was like when we were working at Sarah's house, it was like we were working on an art project, and never dreamed really that it would end up reaching so many people. So that's very gratifying.
Well, Sarah, Shane, Jocelyn, thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you for this beautiful film. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you, Filmmakers Sara Dosa, and all of you for coming out tonight. It was a pleasure.
Spread the word.